Our final speaker, Tom Gorman. And I really appreciate your patience, but Tom, director of Rocky Mountain HIDTA, the high-intensity drug trafficking area there. I talked a little bit about HIDTA before, just how important they are to our task forces, how important they are to law enforcement. We're talking about marijuana today, but there are a whole bunch of subjects that HIDTA is involved with. And I got to tell you, we'd be a little bit lost, wouldn't we, without the involvement of HIDTA and their leadership and their efforts throughout West Virginia and Appalachia and all across this country. It's critically important. In 1968, Director Gorman graduated from San Jose State University and joined the California Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement. He served 10 years as an undercover agent. He made 1,000 undercover purchases and received 2 Purple Hearts from being shot and later stabbed. He was promoted in 1990 to deputy chief in charge of statewide drug enforcement operations. In 1997, he retired to become the director of the Rocky Mountain HIDTA. Director Gorman's a graduate of the FBI National Academy, as a past president of the California Narcotics Officers Association and the National Alliance of State Drug Enforcement Agencies. He was president of the National HIDTA Directors Association from 2005 to 2017. He authored The Myths of Drug Legalization and Marijuana Legalization, The Issues. He also authored a recently published book titled To Believe or Not to Believe, That's the Question, An Undercover Agent's Quest for the Truth. I'm real pleased that you made the journey, and I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to say, first of all, Ed, you need to update some of the examples you give. A couple of the young people said, who in the hell is Johnny Carson? So kind of update that a little bit. And Mike, I want to give you credit. I look at your list of speakers. You've got the most sought after speakers in the nation. Somehow you got them here a little before Christmas in West Virginia. So I don't know how you did it. I know when I got a phone call from your assistant, she said he'd like to have you out here, and I said thank you, but I've got other things to do. Then she talked about being indicted in the Southern District of West Virginia. So here I am under threat of being indicted. I don't know what for, except I drove a red Kia Soul with California plates and a bunch of liberal stickers on the back. I guess that's illegal in West Virginia. I did get a chance to drive around your state a little bit, and the only thing that I was looking for is, where are your mountains? I haven't found them yet. I know you called the West Virginia Mountaineers, but I never did find any mountains here in West Virginia, but I'm still looking. I will say this, and Ed, my buddies from Kentucky, my hillbilly buddies from Kentucky, kept saying, Gorman, tell them this story and tell them that story. And why don't you tell them this story? And I said, hey, look, those all make me out to be a loser. And they said, well, that's why Mike had you on last. You put the worst speaker you have on last because most people be gone anyway. So Ed alluded to it a little bit. Yes, I was a gang member. Yes, I'm from New Jersey. The name of our gang was called the Sabres. We had black leather jackets with cross sabers, and then our top rocker had the word sabers. I found out 3 years ago we misspelled the word sabers. Not the most intelligent people in the world. I do have a nice GED that I have hanging in my office. I worked in a carnival. I was a carny for a while, working a baseball toss. It was fixed, made lots of money. I also was a professional boxer. Spent a lot of time on my back watching the stars while some guy was counting to 10. Realized, of course, I boxed out of Atlantic City under the name of Lefty. That probably was not a good career choice for me. When I was a hoodlum, we got picked up one time, a number of times, but on our way to juvenile hall, which I've been a number of times, me and my buddy in the back seat of a squad car, the officer goes right by the turnoff for juvie. And so, being a smart ass, I told the officer, you don't even know where you're going, man. You just missed the turnoff for juvie. He looked at me and I said, I know exactly where I'm going. Took us to a strip mall, gave us buzz cuts, and then booked us. And I got to tell you, for 3.5 months, my leather jacket was in the closet, because you can't be bad with a buzz cut, So, and that was Officer McClanahan. I still remember his name. Well, after my failed boxing career, I took my underage girlfriend from the Bronx, New York, to Juarez, Mexico, to marry her. We got married at a judge's house at 11 o'clock at night. Pedro was her maid of honor, my best man. That was the beginning of our marriage. The engagement ring I bought her, a little I won in New Jersey. She went to get it cleaned. A couple years later, the stone melted. So you can see what's going on here. Mike did pick the Biggest Loser for last. And lastly, my military career. Vietnam was starting to heat up. I don't want to be a soldier. Seemed like too much work. I want to fly jets. So they said, you just can't fly jets. You got to join Air Force ROTC. So I did. I got kicked out after a month. Apparently the guy, in the military, any military, former military people here? A few of you. When you tell somebody to do something, you expect them to do it. It's a novel approach to me, but this guy with an eagle on his shoulder told me to do something. I said, hey, thanks, but I don't feel like doing that right now. And he pointed to the eagles, and I suggested in other places in his anatomy he might want to stick those eagles, and so they kicked me out. Come home, my wife says, what happened now? I said, they kicked me out of the Air Force. Why? Bad attitude? She says, honey, you have a unique attitude, but with your attitude and background as a gang member, why wouldn't you consider being an undercover cop? I said, what's that? She said, that's where you're a police officer, but you pretend you're a bad guy. I said, you're going to be kidding me. You got jobs like that? So I had to petition the courts to seal my record, which they did when I was 21, and ended up going into law enforcement. So that's how it all started. I will tell you a quick story, and then we'll get on to the details. This is a true story. Cops all have war stories. Some of them are actually true. This is true. I was working undercover in San Jose buying weapons and dope from a bunch of bikers. Moved up to Oakland, California, where at that point in time we had gotten the connection. You keep moving up the ladder. Did that bust in Oakland. Now we're going to Roseville, California to get the main connection. A little bit northeast of Sacramento. Well, it was getting late. Normally, if I'm not home by 10 o'clock, I'll call my wife and say, babe, don't wait up for me because I'm really going to be late tonight. I didn't do that this time. So we hit the place. We get a search warrant, 3 o'clock in the morning. We hit the place. Big gun battle opened up. We win the gun battle, but I got hit in the chest. It didn't actually penetrate. It was a 25 automatic, kind of hit and bounced off somehow. Took me to the hospital anyway, just a big bruise on my chest. We didn't wear vests in those days, but I got lucky. So 6 o'clock in the morning, I stick the key in the door, and Mama's up. Now keep in mind, my wife is an Italian from the Bronx, New York. She's not happy with me. She was not thinking I was walking that thin blue line between life and death, making this a safer world for you and your loved ones, thinking, my God, it happened. He cheated on me, right? So I looked at her and I said, baby, I said, something I need to tell you. Well, she's steaming. And I said, look, you need to sit down. Now she's really steaming because she thinks, not only did he do it, now he's going to tell me about it. So I undid my shirt, opened it up and said, I'd just been shot. And she said, oh, thank God. So I tell cops, if you can be shot like I was or cheat on your wife, take being shot, because I've been married 57 years, so it's worked a lot better for me. So here we go. Enough for the storytelling. I'm not going to talk too much about Colorado because you've heard it all from all the experts, and I thought you got great information today. But I kind of want to put it all together because the war on drugs has been a failure. You heard that time and time again. The pro-marijuana policy they own the message, and that's one of the message they have. Well, what we do for a living is a failure, is basically what they're saying. So the question is it a failure or has it not been a failure? And that's important because we have to understand drug policy if we want to understand everything you heard today and why we're going through what we're going. So the question is, has drug policy been a failure? So the first thing you have to answer, and I want you to answer this to yourself. If somebody asks you, what is the purpose of drug policy, what would your answer be? And the purpose of drug policy is very simple. There's been books and doctor's thesis, etc., written about it, but it's very simple. The purpose of drug policy is to limit the number of people using drugs. Well, why would we want to do that? The reason we want to limit the number of people using drugs is that we know that there's adverse consequences from drug use on our society. So the more we limit it, the less the adverse consequences. It's that simple. That's what our drug policy is all about. So then the next question is, isn't drug use a victimless crime? You heard that all the time. They own that message too. Hey, it's a victimless crime. It shouldn't be illegal. Is it in fact a victimless crime? Now, the fact of the matter is it has more victims than almost any other crime. The reason it does is because there's 4 sets of victims. And the first one is the user. The user is in fact a victim. They're self-chosen. We call them self-chosen because they choose to use drugs. But I don't think anyone that smoked their first joint or did crack or drink alcohol for that matter, said, I'm going to be addicted. I'm going to become an alcoholic. I'm going to have this drink. I'm going to smoke this joint, and I'm going to be addicted to it. I'm going to have bad things happen to me. They don't think that way. So they are, in fact, victims in a sense. Okay? Let me ask a question. And what happens to a lot of users is our motivation changes, our attitude changes. Those of you the cops, how many times you talk to parents and say, my God, what happened to my daughter? She's changed. And you know right off the get-go, your daughter's involved in drugs. Let me ask you a question. How many of you outside of your occupation, don't count what you in your occupation, know somebody that's gotten involved in drugs and you've seen them change and go downhill drastically? How many of you? Okay, about 75% of the people in this room have seen that. That's what happens when somebody uses drugs generally. The other thing is the family and friends. First of all, most people get started on drugs because of family and friends introduce them. Secondly, what it does to parents, what it does to kids being raised in a druggy home. I could go on and on and on with horror stories, but let me ask you a question. How many of you know families have been severely adversely impacted by somebody in that family that's used drugs outside of your job? Again, if you look around the room, it's amazing so those are victims. And then the victims of crime. The nexus between crime and drug abuse is indisputable. There is no argument about it that drugs and crime go hand in hand, whether it's an impaired driver like Dale was talking about, or whether it's doing things you wouldn't normally do, whether it's teenagers that can get involved in high-risk behavior, something they wouldn't do if they weren't loaded. And you know, as a teenager, you look back at your teenage years, you did things that you would never do today, because you have a tendency to be high risk. Put those kids loaded and then watch that high risk increase. And then also, if you're none of those, you're a victim because you're paying the price for it. And it's about $800 per person. So it's very expensive. So this young man here, Andrew Zorn, here's an example. And this is way, way, way too common. But Andrew was an Iraqi vet, college graduate, got addicted to marijuana. In and out of rehab, couldn't shake it. He ended up committing suicide. From Arizona, ended up committing suicide. And in his suicide note, he said a couple things that are very telling. Marijuana ruined my brain, killed my soul. I need to set my parents free. Now, when you think about that, usually we think of suicides as being a very selfish act. In this case, he knew not only what it did to him, what it was doing to the family, and he needed to set him free. And I'll tell you what, this happens way, way too often that we kind of, I think somebody here mentioned, we need to remember we're talking about not just numbers, we're talking about human lives and human beings. So, the next question I have to ask you, if this is a problem, we don't want to have any more Andrew Zorn, the question is, what are the factors that affect the rate of drug use? Because if you don't know that, how are you going to impact it? So let's look at that. If somebody asks you what are the factors, there's basically four of them. One is the price. The higher the price, the less people use. The lower the price, the more people use. That's simple economics. It works with other products. You've seen it work with tobacco. It could go on and on and on as that example. And particularly if you're on a fixed income like younger people, price has a tendency. So we want to keep the price of drugs as high as we can keep them. The next one is availability. How available are drugs? And that includes search time. Search time means how long it takes you to get the particular drug. If this table over here, we wanted to go out downtown to score some Coke, and it's taken 20 minutes, 30 minutes, somebody would drop off, another person would drop off. So search time's important, and it's not as available as people like to pretend. They say you can get dope any place you want. If that was that easy, being an undercover agent would be a piece of cake, and it's not that easy. It's underground, it's concealed, you got to know somebody, et cetera, et cetera. So availability, we want to keep availability reduced. We don't want to make it more available. Perception of risk is a big thing. I'm going to get in trouble. And the other thing is not only get in trouble, but what it'll do to me physically and mentally. Big factor, perception of risk, as somebody looks at this. Columbia University did a study many, many years ago of high school seniors, and 51% said they did not use marijuana because they're afraid of getting arrested. You know what? If that 51% didn't use drugs because they're afraid of getting arrested, I'm fine with that. I think that's a great deterrent. Afraid of getting in trouble with their parent, in trouble at school, and then what it does to you mentally and what it does to you physically. We need to keep the perception of risk up. And lastly, and where we're losing the battle today, is public attitude. The more accepting the public is, the more people use, the less accepting, the less people use. And that's in behavior in general. That's not rocket science. Anytime you normalize something, anytime you accept something, people are going to tend to use it more than if it's not an acceptable behavior. And that's just human nature. So the question is, has the war on drugs been a failure? And my question to you is, if you think it has been, tell me what would it take for you to change your mind. What percentage would be acceptable to you? Would it be the same percent as alcohol use? Would it be the same percent of alcoholics? Would it be the same percent as tobacco? What do you want to say, hey, it's been relatively successful? Well, here's what it looks like. Only 10% of people in this country use any kind of illegal drugs. That 10%. About 24% use tobacco, and about 52% use alcohol. Now let's talk about alcohol a minute, and this is important. This will be the precursor to what we're going to see with legalized marijuana. Okay, alcohol's our legal drug. What is the worst drug that we have in our country that has the greatest impact on our society? It is absolutely alcohol, bar none. Whether you want to talk about costs, whether you want to talk about families being destroyed, you want to talk about crime, 2.1 million people arrested on alcohol, you want to talk about our highways where 10,000 people are killed every year on our highways. I don't care what it is, alcohol makes illegal drugs pale compared to the cost of alcohol. Okay? So why is that? Why is it? Alcohol is relatively cheap. Alcohol is readily available. There's very little perception of risk with alcohol, and totally publicly acceptable. Okay? We almost have as many people, listen to this, addicted to alcohol as use all the illegal drugs combined. Think about that. Addicted to alcohol. And you know what it's like to be an addict of alcohol, to be an alcoholic? Some of you probably experienced that in your own personal lives. It's devastating, because that bottle becomes their almighty God. Even though in their heart they say, I know it's going to cost me a job, I know it's going to cost my family, but that bottle becomes their all. Now, what we want to do, though, is we want to regulate marijuana like alcohol. And if that isn't the stupidest thing you've ever heard of, why would we want to do that? Why do we want to mimic what we already know alcohol's costing us? Because we have another drug, legal drug, that we can look at, tobacco. Where are we on tobacco? We have had tremendous success in tobacco. We have cut tobacco use down by over 50%. It used to be, in my generation, we went down and to the cocktail lounge, there'd be ladies walking around with free cigarettes. There'd be cigarette machines in the lobby. If I had a pack of cigarettes in my pocket, I'd automatically offer it to you. It was all over the place. It was cool to smoke. The Marlboro Man, Joe Camel. So if you look at cigarette smoking and why have we been successful, it's because we're using drug policy techniques on it. You look at availability has changed tremendously. You can't advertise, you can't have cigarette machines, it's behind the counter. If you took like a price has skyrocketed, $5, $6, $7 a pack. That's a lot if you smoke a pack a day. Perception of risk, even smokers will tell you, hey, I know it causes cancer. I hope I'm one of those that don't get it. I know it causes emphysema. I know it causes heart attacks. I know that. There's no question about that. And lastly, public attitude has changed. If you smoke, and maybe some of you smoke, you know when you're out there at 32 degrees and you got a cigarette hanging out of your mouth, people walk by you, you feel like you're a leopard. When you get in the elevator, people go, what's that smell? It is no longer a norm. It is no longer socially acceptable to smoke cigarettes. So we're using drug policy techniques on tobacco. It works, but we want to legalize marijuana like alcohol. 90% of people in this country do not use drugs. Why do we want to change that? What we want to do is we want to reduce it. The highest it's ever been prior to drug laws, and that was way back when lanolin and cocaine and stuff prior to drug laws, was 1979, and that was the height or toward the end of the hippie movement, the Woodstocks, et cetera, is at about 14%. Then over a period of time in the 80s, we got it down to 7%, and now it's back up to 10%. And I expect it to keep growing, but here's what it looks like, okay? Now, what would happen if we could take our legal drugs, which are in red, and get them down to where illegal drug use would be? We'd be celebrating what a tremendous victory that is in this country. What a great thing it would be for our society, how families be intact, there'd be less crime, there'd be less deaths and on. We would say, what a successful policy we had. So how dare you tell me that our drug policy is a failure? Because what would happen when that happens? What's the United States of America going to look like when we have that kind of thing happen? And if we use the same philosophy that we use on alcohol, don't be shocked if you hear this, because Oregon is going to have a ballot initiative, I think, next election to legalize psilocybin for medical use for depression and addiction. Okay, psilocybin. Yeah, they're not going to be depressed because they're going to be in a different world, but now, there was a Russian back in the 70s. I read an article, and I don't have the article, but he was some kind of Russian official that said, this is during the Cold War, you don't have to build your nuclear arsenal to defeat America. Just get them to legalize drugs and they'll destroy from within. This was back in the time when our drug culture really took off. Think about that. Over a period of time, do you think that treatment potentially has some truth in it? And look, these words here are their words. I didn't say this. If you look at somebody who uses marijuana or any kind of drug, well, they say, man, I got stoned last night, I got high, I got wasted, toasted, on and on and on. Those are their words. So they're saying, this is what happened to me when I used THC. This is what happened to me when I used coke. This is what happened to me when I used drugs. How consistent is that with what we want for this country? And what we want for the country is a ready military, quality education, strong communities, safe highways. It's inconsistent what it does and what we want. And when we have more people stoned, more people wasted, it's going to have a tremendous impact on what makes America great. So that is why I think when we talk about this whole movement, we have to be concerned. There's a couple things I want to run by you really quick, and these are things to think about. If I asked you whether you believe in legalizing marijuana or you don't believe in legalizing marijuana, do you believe in a rule of law? Do you believe that the rule of law is a difference between a civilized society and anarchy? Your question's got to be, of course I believe in a rule of law. My kids have to play by the soccer rules. My kids have to play or they're going to get red carded. My kids have to play by the rules of society. I expect my kids, yes I do, okay? Here's the problem. What we have done, what we have now done, and this is probably ought to be the biggest concern of ours, is we have allowed states like Colorado and Washington to violate the rule of law, because federal law, whether you like it or not, supersedes state law. The courts have even, the Supreme Court's even confirmed that. What Colorado and Washington and Oregon have done, folks, is they have authorized and licensed people to commit federal felonies. Those people that work in those shops, they're felons. Those shops, they're criminal enterprises. The money they make is subject to seizure. It makes no sense, because where do we draw the line? Is it okay then to legalize on a state level counterfeiting? Is it okay to legalize civil rights violations? You can't do that. You cannot authorize people to violate federal law. So if you want to talk about the rule of law, we let the states do this now. What's next? And what's next? We are the United States. The reason we're united is because federal law supersedes state law. Now, what Colorado could do, they could change their own laws. They could say, okay, we don't want to have anything under an ounce be against the law. We don't want to have 6 plants or let's be. They have a right to do that. Then their local cops and state cops have nothing to enforce. But no, they're not doing that. They're actually authorizing, they're aiding and abetting federal felonies. It's just amazing. The money they take in their taxes is subject to seizure. I just as a cop don't understand. Even the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that cops do not have to give back marijuana they seized, even though the case they didn't charge because if we did that, we'd be committing a federal felony. Think about that. If that doesn't upset you and concern you, these people, these legislators take an oath of office. Do they not listen to what they say? As a cop, I took an oath of office, and I have to abide by the Constitution. This is not consistent with the Constitution of the United States of America. It's just amazing, mind-boggling to me. The other thing to look at is the marijuana polls. You hear people say, these are things to think about. America wants to legalize marijuana, 60%, 50%. But you have to look at the question, and I think Kevin covered this well. You have to look at the question they're asking. Do you think somebody over 21 ought to be able to possess and use small amounts of marijuana? People say, yeah. Do you believe it all? You got a choice between prohibition, going to jail, and not going to jail. People are going to say yes. But it's way those poll questions are worded, which are key, because you're going to say they ask about adults, small amounts, criminal versus legal, personal use. They never ask about alternatives like decriminalization. They never compare medical, recreational, commercial industry, edibles, etc. So when you talk about poll questions, it's easy to get 50%, but when there are alternatives in the polling, such as is done in the Mason-Dixon poll, now this was funded by SAM, but it shows that 50% are okay with federal enforcement of laws, but not not target users. And if they had a choice between decriminalization and total legalization, they would pick decriminalization or legalization going to 50%. And in Colorado, over 60% of jurisdictions had banned pot shops, even though they voted for it. And lastly, you're going to hear the term harm reduction. This is very controversial because of people involved in harm reduction. I want you to, first of all, back in the 80s, the pro-drug people said, let's use terms like harm reduction when you talk about some of these things. Harm reduction basically is needle exchange and safe injection sites. Now, the people that believe in that, and I've met with them, there's a difference of why they believe and why I don't. Their concern is the individual. They want to help that individual, and I get it. They know the individual. They see the individual come in. In our case, we're concerned with the more you normalize, the more you make this acceptable behavior, the more people we're going to have that you're going to have to treat. And that's common sense is if you stigmatize a behavior, less people use, and if you don't stigmatize it, more people are going to engage in that behavior. Now, their problem with stigmatizing is they'll say that individual may not come in. That may be true. That individual may be more immune to or say, hey, look, I got a problem because it's not stigmatized. And that's probably true. But on the same token, we're saying we don't want more individuals like that, so we have a choice. Society or those individuals. And I understand why they picked individuals, and they don't disagree with me. But and most of the people, except for the ones that are using this like medical marijuana, will tell you that I think they're sincere in what they say, and we've had many conversations with them. But this is a needle exchange. Here's what you get. You go in, you can pick cotton, tie rag, some place to cook your marijuana. They've got alcohol, they've got condoms, you get all that, and you get 10 needles and syringes the first time in. After that, you turn in one, and you can get as many as you want. That's what needle exchange is in Colorado and some of the other places. And lastly, you have the safe injection sites where you can go shoot up, and a doctor's there. Some lessons to learn is that what we say in law enforcement, our vocabulary is very much more like the people who are using drugs. Theirs is changing where they say it's substance misuse behavior, not drug user. It's withdrawal management, not detox. Again, they're very concerned with putting any kind of stigma on it, and we want the stigma just like we do with tobacco because we know it works. That's basically what I have to say. Just be aware of the rule of law, be aware of the polling, and be aware of harm reduction. And again, I'm not putting the people down to believe in it, but I'm saying for the good of society, we need to not go that direction. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Tom.